Hi, my name is Phyllis Leavitt. I am an author and a psychotherapist, and I am so honored to be part of the Prosperity Show and share my journey with writing my latest book, which is called America in Therapy, A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis. And in a nutshell, what I want to share with you today is what I have learned as a client and a psychotherapist for many, many years about what hurts and what heals in our families, in our families of origin, and in our larger family systems, all the way up to our government and really our international relations.
Ladies and gentlemen, and all the lovely listeners out there, welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Online Prosperity Show. I'm your host, Prosper Taruvinga, your guide through the labyrinth of prosperity. Now, today we have a very special guest that's joining us, someone whose expertise delves deep into human psyche, offering profound insights into our nation's collective journey towards healing and unity. And when I call our nation, I'm talking about America. Now, Phyllis, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me here today with you.
Absolutely. I take it you're representing all of America today, or are we just talking about your book, America in Therapy?
We're talking about my book, America in Therapy, but I would say that a lot of what I'm talking about really is international. I only talk about America because I live here, but I think people in other countries can also relate to many of the things that I'm talking about.
Absolutely. Fantastic. And for those that are just tuning in, well, Phyllis is not just your ordinary psychotherapist who's turned herself into an author. No, Phyllis has ventured beyond the confines of traditional therapy rooms and stepping into this national stage with her latest book, America in Therapy. And this is a new approach to hope and healing for a nation in crisis. So, today we're just going to be talking about that and, what makes Phyllis an expert in talking about this topic. Now, Phyllis, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey so far, because all of this really sounds inspiring.
Thank you. Yeah. I think, like so many people, I ended up in a profession that had personal value to me as an individual. I went to therapy when I was in my 30s, and I was at a very difficult time in my life. I was in a very difficult marriage. I had three little kids, and I really didn't know why I was suffering from a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of just sort of inability to feel like I was self-expressed in a satisfying way in the world. And I went home from my first therapy session and bought a book on psychology. And the first thing I read, I'm an older generation. So when I was young, people weren't talking about psychology the way they do today. It was more of like a sign that something's wrong with you, or you're weak, or you can't do it on your own if you went to see a therapist. But by the time I was in my mid 30s, it was a little bit more common, a little bit more of a common thing to do. And the first thing I read in that book was that what happens in your childhood there really affects the way you feel about yourself, what you think, the coping mechanisms you come up with, your strategies for survival are very much affected by the experiences you have, especially in your family of origin or your immediate community, um, and the role models for expectations and behaviors that you are exposed to, as well as people's reactions to you. And and that was just news to me. My therapist said, what was your childhood like? And I said, it was fine. The problem is me. Um, and, and actually my childhood wasn't fine. There was some trauma in my early life, and slowly, I began to uncover that and process what the effect of that was on me. And all the things that I was suffering from were directly related to traumatic experiences that I had with other people. And I don't even know if everybody knows that. Even today, even with psychology being more widespread today, I don't know if we really know that our symptoms are usually directly related to something that's not working in our relationships or in our environment. And of course, the biggest determinant in our environment is other people and how they behave toward us and what they think about us and what they say about us and what they do. So I became a therapist. I worked with many, many people, children, adults, couples, um, families. I worked for 2 years in a sexual abuse treatment program, which was very eye-opening about the dynamics of abuse and neglect. And I began to see two things, and my book America in Therapy really, I want to say it sort of it does what therapy does in a way. It's like it opens the space to really delve into what causes our pain and our dysfunction, but it also opens the space to what can be most healing and what can interrupt that cycle of dysfunction and abuse among people, whether it's in a family or in a community or a state or a country. And so bottom line, or I guess to put it in a nutshell, I took that lens of what I learned from working with families and individuals and children, and I took that lens to America. And I look at the family of America the way we look at a family of origin for an individual person, and really trying to understand why we have so much escalating violence and divisiveness and what fuels that and what keeps it alive, and when none of us want that in our own personal lives. And what I say about that is that that is a mental health issue. The disconnect between what we all want for ourselves, safety, peace, love, belonging, cooperation, feeling valued, tools and strategies for nonviolent conflict resolution, all the things that we really want in our own lives, we still allow and condone to be perpetrated on other people. And I feel that that's a very significant and important mental health issue that I would like to address both from a diagnostic and a healing point of view in my book.
Fantastic. And thank you so much for taking this burden and shining the light on what a lot of people have just been sweeping under the rug. Now, like you said, this therapy sort of journey before you became one, you underwent, therapy sessions yourself. What was life like prior to this? And as you explained, you also had to do this with your three young kids and a family.
It was really hard. And I say that not to even put the focus on myself. I think there's a lot of people who are really struggling to survive. They're struggling to show up every day for their children, struggling to show up at work or school or with all the important things that they need to do in their life. And you have to learn to repress some of your distress and your pain in order to do that. And it can become really difficult to do that. And especially if you don't have any place to get help, any place to really talk through what's going on for you and have someone shine some light for you. Like I said, the first therapist, and I had several therapists for a number of years, um, really helped me see that what I was suffering from were not defects in myself. They were not flaws in my character. They were understandable symptoms that occurred as a result of abnormal things that happened to me or harmful things that happened to me. And I don't even know if a lot of people know that about themselves. And so they feel like I did, which is I'm the problem. There's something wrong with me. And then we try to hide it, or we act it out, or we numb it out with drugs or alcohol, or, being driven, or whatever we do to try to not feel these really painful feelings. Because none of us really wants to feel pain. So we need someone, something, some context in which it's safe to let that out of our system and reprocess the things that we've taken on about ourselves that are harmful, that are not true, and that have kept us from being connected to all of our strengths and gifts and the beautiful people we were born to be.
Fantastic. And I quite like how you're bringing all of this about because as you said, when kids are growing up, they're at that formidable age where everything that affects them will then later on manifest in life. How
Right.
important is it for parents to role model the behaviors that they might want the kids to then have moving forward? Because, as you said, you were not being able to be there for the three kids that you had at that time.
Yeah, it's really important. I mean, and I think a lot of people like myself were doing the best we could with what we had, but it wasn't always great because we were suffering. And yes, it's really important for parents to role model. Probably the most important role model is our parents and the people who are helping raise us. Um, and that's one of the reasons why one of the things I talk about is I really believe that in America and in all countries, really all over the world, families are the most important resource we have. Children are our most valuable resource as well. But our families and our children, because to the extent that we can role model those loving, safe behaviors that we talked about and conditions that we talked about, um, then we raise children that are able to be safe and peaceful and loving contributors to the world in their adult lives, and they don't carry on this cycle of abuse and neglect and discrimination and targeting other people, or blame and shame, whatever the things that we do that come out of not being treated well by people. So my belief is that our resources should primarily be driven toward helping families, because parents who don't do it well, who don't role model great behaviors or expectations for their children, they need help, not punishment. They need help. They
Mm,
probably didn't get it themselves.
quite like that, because once you know, started on this journey of being a therapist, you started working with families, and I'm supposing you had like a cross-section view of what it looked like, inside of these families. And
Right.
I must say this with utmost love and respect. Fish do not see the water that they swim in, and neither can people see the air that they breathe in. So, we were joking earlier that we don't even look at what our neighbor is doing. So many people are just in a little silo of what their family is doing and might not see that either what they're doing is either wrong or is detrimental to the development
Right.
of the future. Now, could you maybe highlight some of the things that you would have noticed that were in common amongst these families that seemingly they thought they were doing okay, but are very damaging to, the future of the kids that they were raising?
Yeah, I mean, and some of it, I think people even know isn't okay, but they're trapped in their own reactive cycle. But basically, the dynamics and I outline this in detail in my book, the dynamics that we find in dysfunctional and abusive families are that those who have the most power, who have the ability to harm other people because they have control over them, or those people like children and sometimes spouses are dependent on them for their very life. Um, they tend to justify the harmful things that they do. And they may believe that, like you said, they may believe that spare the rod and spoil the child. So they think beating their child is actually the right thing to do. Um, but they have the power to do it, and to the extent that there's no one who has the power to resist, they can keep on doing it. But they justify what they do, even sexual abuse or physical violence, or saying horrible things like, I wish you were never born, or I'm going to send you back to the orphanage. I mean, I've heard all these things. If you cry, I'm going to beat you harder. Don't, like, if you cry, I'm going to give you something to cry about. These are things that are very unconsciously repeated and passed down from generation to generation. Someone who sexually abuses a child might say, you asked for it, you wanted it, you liked it. Whatever they can come up with, or maybe they heard that themselves when they were abused. Because I'm really, the point of what I'm writing, whether I'm talking about the family or I'm talking about the government, the point of what I'm writing is not about blaming the abuser. The point of what I'm writing is, what do we need to understand and do to stop the cycle, to interrupt the cycle and bring health and well-being to everyone? Because inside the abuser, and this is what I have found, inside the abuser, whether it's a parent or a governing official is a victim that's untreated, that's unhealed, and who has identified with some kind of form of aggression that they learned. And they may really, as you said, they may really believe they're doing the right thing. But I think in our field, we really want to point out that what they're doing, if it's violent toward another person, if it's hateful toward another person, if it's discriminatory or withholding toward another person, it hurts them and they become symptomatic. And then they become unsafe individuals, sometimes, not everyone, in our society. And so we have to look at it from an individual level and a national systemic level of what's happening in our smallest families and what's happening in our largest families. And how do we interrupt this cycle and bring people back to love and connection and belonging and safety and peace?
Right. And obviously, going back to people not seeing the dangers of what they're doing or the ills of what they're doing, because, like you say, they keep justifying themselves. There would have been a lot of challenges for you pinpointing this because you're literally shining the spotlight on that
Yeah.
particular loved one who's doing all these bad things to the family, and that might come as news to all the other family members. And so maybe you can walk us through the kind of challenges that you maybe faced, as a person who was bringing
Yeah.
light,
Yeah.
how that has
Well, I'll
shaped
give you
your
a really
therapy.
easy example to understand. So, when I first was a psychotherapist, I really wanted to work with children. And so I had a lot of young children as clients. And what I found in the practice that I had was that most of the children that were referred to therapy for things like bedwetting or fighting with their siblings or not doing well in school or having fears like of the dark or spiders or fears of men or whatever they had. Um, Most of the children that were referred to me for therapy were actually suffering from conflict between their parents, and very often from a conflictual divorce that they were caught in the middle of. And so just seeing the child was helpful and diagnostic more than anything, because if the themes of their play were parents fighting or them hiding while there's a war going on, um, then the work was really with their parents. The work was really with helping parents understand that if you're fighting in front of your child, if you don't get help to resolve your issues, and if you have to stay away from each other, if you can't resolve your divorce, keep the conflict away from your children, get your own help, do whatever you can to resolve it out of the hearing of your child as much as possible, because they're suffering. And the symptoms that you're seeing them having are not because there's something wrong with your child. Like a child who's bedwetting because they're anxious, because their parents are fighting around them, doesn't have a bedwetting problem. They have an anxiety problem that's showing up as bedwetting, and that's the way they're calling for help. They're having a symptom, like our body will have a symptom that tells us something's wrong. We need help. Something needs to be cured, healed, fixed, changed here. Um, and so what I found was that, I would ask children, I would say, is it okay if I talk to your mom and dad about what you're feeling about the fighting that you see, if they were if that's what came up in the session? And often it came up either directly or indirectly in their play. And they were always fine with that because they wanted to be unburdened of what they were carrying. And so for some parents, that was hard, because they were really, and I get this, honestly, I get it. I have empathy for divorcing parents. I went through a divorce. It was not easy. Believe me, I think for anybody who's been through one, it's not easy. But sometimes we get so invested in making the other person wrong that we don't see the damage we're doing to our children. And I think the same thing is true in a country, that one party or one official is so invested in making the other party or the other person wrong that they don't see the damage they're doing to the citizenry of our country, because it's not any different. We're caught in the battles between parties, between political or, ideologies. Um, every citizen, I think, I can't speak for every citizen, but many, many people, I will say, are really affected by what's going on in politics in America today. And it's very distressing. And I've shared this many times. I've been a therapist since 1989, and it wasn't until 2016 election that I ever had a client come to therapy traumatized by the politics in our country, up at night, scared about what was going to happen to America, afraid we were going down the road of tyranny and having a despot in power. And I think that's real for many, many people, that many people are afraid and they don't know what to do. And
Mhm.
so I wrote my book to try to talk about what are some of the paradigm shifts that we need to change the environment of the family of America. What are some of the practices we could start to employ that would begin to bring us to healing rather than fuel divisiveness? Because everything we can do for a family, we could do for America if we set our mind to it.
Fantastic. And thank you so much for taking us through that, because obviously it wouldn't have been easy for you to deal with all of these and just keep it to yourself. And I think that's the reason why you decided to snitch on America and write the book.
Well, I think it's really true that, when you see, I think for all of us, if you have a chance to heal anything in your life, it's a most normal response that you want to share what you learned with other people. And seeing the correlation between the individual family and the family of America, um, I didn't feel like I could or wanted to be silent about that. When I first became a therapist, and I'll tell you, I'm an introvert by nature. I'm not somebody who likes to be on a big stage. That's not my comfort zone. I never imagined I would be talking to my country. But my own healing journey and the work that I did with so many people made me feel like that was my responsibility as one citizen in this world.
Absolutely. Now, you've taken your lived experience and your trained experience, combined them into a message of hope using tools and modalities, that are used in the field of psychology. And these are the same tools that can either heal an individual and families that are sort of in dysfunction, and at the same time can actually be used to heal a community, because a family is just an microcosm of what the grand community state nation
Exactly.
becomes is. So if we fix the one atom, the whole cell, becomes fully functional. Now, maybe could you maybe tell us some of these tools that you are sharing in
Yeah.
the book that people can
Yeah.
have a look at?
So, one of the things I'll say about the whole world of psychotherapy is that it's designed to help us reconnect to ourselves and reconnect safely and peacefully with other people in our lives, if it's at all possible. And so, I would say one of the biggest tools in service of that healing of relationship rather than fueling our divides and our differences is actually taking the focus off the other person and what we think they're doing wrong and how they're bad and what we judge about them, and looking at ourselves. What's my part in this? What's my responsibility in the conflict? And I'm not talking here about if some innocent person is just completely assaulted and they have nothing to do with the assault. I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about where we're at odds with other people. We can take responsibility for restraining our most aggressive impulses. I think restraint is probably the first and most bottom line requirement for healing, because we can't just keep acting out on each other, calling each other names, screaming, slamming the door, walking out, or advocating violence, because violence begets violence. And I think we know these things, but we keep justifying doing them. So restraint of our most aggressive impulses is number one. Number two is really looking at ourselves. Where am I coming from? What's my motivation? What is it I'm really after here? Do I have an open mind, or am I fixated on one point of view and I'm going to try to beat it into you, or make you wrong and bad because you don't agree? So I'm reflecting on my own behavior, my own attitudes, maybe my tone of voice, maybe the expression on my face. Maybe it's hostile, even though I think I'm speaking truth. Maybe I'm talking to you like you're inferior to me. So I'm really reflecting on my own behavior, my own attitude, my own motivation, my own thoughts. Um, and let me just tell you that when people are in conflict, and if you've ever had conflict with a partner or your child or someone else in your life, which most of us have, it's really hard to keep the focus on yourself because we're just so trained to want to set the other person straight. That it's hard to come back and say, what's my contribution to this? And could I change the dynamic here? So after I reflect on myself, and these things sort of can happen simultaneously, but I take them apart, and I have a whole chapter on this in my book. Um, then I need to take responsibility. If I'm making, an ugly face at you, I need to take responsibility to change that because I don't want you to do that to me. I don't want you to yell at me. I don't want you to put me down. I don't want you to storm out of the room or slam the door in my face. So, can I be responsible not to do those things to you, even if I'm really upset with you, even if I really disagree?
Mm.
And after that, it's like, do I need to make amends? Maybe I said something that wasn't very kind. Maybe I looked at you in a really ugly way or an unkind way. Is there something I need to make amends for? Maybe I ignored you. Maybe I made you feel inferior by the things that I said. Maybe I thought you were, and I communicated that. So what do I need to do to set this right, just from my own end? You may need to do those things too, but I'm not focused on that because what I've found is that, and I can ask for that, but what I've found is that to the extent that I can be responsible for myself, which can be really hard, as I say, it opens the door for you to want to be that way with me. And I've really seen this happen. And I definitely see it in the marriage that I have now. When my husband and I get into a little whatever, um, I notice that if one of us pulls back and speaks differently or calms down or just owns our own stuff and says, I really blah blah, I really did that, and I'm sorry. I did have a harsh tone of voice to you, or I really was annoyed and I was critical. It makes it so much easier and safer for the other person to meet us there. And then it's much more easy for us to find resolution. Just that deep listening from a place of I'm being accountable. That creates deep listening because when I'm focused on you and what you did wrong, I'm no longer listening to you. I'm just wanting you to listen to me.
Mhm.
Um, and then the last two elements of that, and I think you can see how all of this could be applied on a governmental level. What if the people who are fighting in Congress or walking out on each other or calling each other names in the media actually sat down and listened and focused on their own accountability in the level of communication, what their communication is, what their motivation is, and do they have an outcome of working it out? Because left to our own devices, often that's not the goal. Often the goal is not we're going to work it out. The goal is I want you to agree with me and do what I say. And that is not healing. That doesn't bring people together. And so the last thing is that we're really committed to reconnecting. And I can tell you, and sometimes, of course, we can't. We're just too much at odds or we're too angry. But then our responsibility really is to separate peacefully and not with violence and not with, slander and all the rest of those really harmful things. And again, what I say is it's easy to fight. It's easy to wage war. It's really hard to commit to love and safety and peace. It's hard work and it takes a lot of self-control and it takes a lot of self-restraint and it takes a lot of self-responsibility. And like I was saying, anybody who's in an intimate relationship knows how hard that is at times. And sometimes it's just easy because you know what's possible on the other side. That feeling of love and reconnection is better than any feeling in the world.
Wow. Thank you so much for obviously really, really shining a light on things that seemingly are easy to do, but very difficult for a lot of people. Because I think any one of us, when we're growing up, you're always taught and reminded that every time you point a finger at someone, three fingers
Mhm,
pointing back at you, as opposed to the one finger that you're pointing at some.
mhm,
And
mhm.
while I was thinking about that, very timely lesson in childhood, it reminded me, if you can indulge me for a little bit here, Phyllis,
Sure.
in my culture, we have what's called a rite of passage, where at like 16, boys go, and at 13, because apparently girls are smarter. That's somebody can debate that, right? But that being the case now, Phyllis, you're taken in, and the village leaders proverbially tap you on the shoulder and say, "Hey, it's your turn to lead." So what that now creates is a pattern break, where you're now involved in decision making, you're now involved in adult conversations, and you're now involved in being part of what's happening with the older people. And kids can't wait to get to that age, because they're not a kid anymore. All right.
Right.
And when they then come back, they're taken around the village, so that they can learn skills from a carpenter or a smith or whatever it is. And then you take on whatever job you want based on the apprenticeship that you have taken. So literally, it takes a village to raise a child, especially in that sort of instance. And then you take that back to, first world, where everybody just grows up, just like in the movies. You go to kinder, go to junior school, go to high school, fall in love with your high school sweetheart, go to uni, and you get married, get a job, get promoted, 2.5 kids, and then you die. And I just blame Hollywood for that, because it all happens in 35 minutes plus commercials, and people think that's how life should be, you know? And I feel like your book presents that pattern break, that rite of passage that really taps people on the shoulder and says, "Hey, yes, we've been living like this. We're adults now. How
Yeah.
about looking within?" Maybe you can comment on that.
No, absolutely. I love what you have had in your culture, and I wish we had more of that in America. And there may be pockets of people who, from their own culture, do something like that, but it's not widespread. And one of the things that you talk about when you share that model of becoming an adult is, and it may not be perfect, but it certainly is in a wonderful direction, is something that we really don't have here. And that is really wishing the best for each other, really supporting each other to thrive and grow and find their talent and be successful. We're so competitive in America. And again, nothing that I say applies to everyone, but it is part of the culture. It's highly competitive. And I don't believe that we live in an atmosphere that really wishes the best for everyone. And it's a bedrock for peace, for love, for healthy human relations. In a healthy family, everybody wishes the best for everyone, and they really look at what they're doing to see if it supports that.
Mm,
So
I,
it's really beautiful what you shared.
absolutely. So, for the uninitiated, where can they get a copy of your book?
You can find it on any of the major booksellers, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all the other places you go to buy your books. And please feel free to go to my website, www.phyllisleavitt.com. You can contact me personally. I'm happy to talk to anyone. I have lots of articles and blogs and videos on my website and on YouTube and LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook and all the social media. But the best place to contact me is on my website. And um, if you sign in to actually contact me or get my newsletter, you will now get a free copy of those 6 elements of repair that I went through on the show with you: restraint and reflection and responsibility and making amends and finding resolution and reconnecting with one another. And I go into that in this free PDF in a way that's very user friendly and in a way that helps you could help you if you're interested. Apply it in your own life with the people in your own life in a very simple way. Because it really starts with us, right? If we're going to change a nation, we have to change ourselves.
Absolutely. And all those suits that are fighting and screaming at Parliament House are not doing as much as you are in 120,000 words that you've packaged together into a book.
Thank you. I did my best. And I probably have a sequel to this book if I can get myself to write it, because there's so much to say about what we've already learned about what helps and what heals. And certainly to understand what harms so that we can all be agents of healing in our own lives. One person can make the difference for anyone.
Absolutely. Now, Phyllis, I must have you know that you have actually committed the ultimate sin. No one mentions a sequel to a book or writing another book on the Online Prosperity Show and does not pledge to come back and talk about the new book. So, for those that are watching
Okay.
right now, Phyllis has just signed up for yet another episode of the Online Prosperity Show, and she will be coming back with the sequel. Now, obviously, this is well, true, and good. I mean, it's good enough that we're talking about this and discussing, that America is in therapy and there is hope, if people apply, the tools that you have shared with us and everything else. But you were also going through stuff. What makes you get out of your own things and want to help other people? Because when we started the episode, you said you were going through therapy as well, and you were in some sort of depression and things of that nature. But what then gives you the motivation to want to help other people also get out of this? Because you could just sit there and get yourself fixed first.
Yeah, I don't think I'm different from a lot of people in that way. I think that when I first began my process, I didn't know if I would actually ever feel better. I think I probably would never have gone to a therapist or engaged in any kind of healing modality if some part of me didn't have some hope. I think if I was totally hopeless, I probably would have done nothing. And there are people who are totally hopeless, and we have to know that because it's a very tragic outcome from some of the abuses on a societal level and on a family level. But so some part of me had hope enough to go through the door and start to release some of the pain and the confusion that I felt inside myself. And if you had told me in the beginning, Phyllis, there's light at the end of the tunnel, I know there is, and I will stay with you until you find your light at the end of your tunnel. I don't know if I would have believed them, but nobody said that to me, you know. Um, but and I had some adequate help and some good therapy for sure. Um, but having made that journey and coming out of the darkest places, and it's not that I can't be triggered, and it's not that I don't have upset sometimes in my life, um, but having come out of those darkest places and not living there anymore, I know there's hope. And I feel like I want to share that with other people because I know what it's like to not have it, to not trust it, to not believe that your life can get better, that you can actually reconnect to something more essential in yourself, hear your own guidance, trust yourself, trust your own intuition, trust your own gifts. And it can be a lifelong journey, but you know what? I don't know that there is a better journey. So I want to share that. And I think I'm certainly not alone. I'm sure from what you're doing, that's what you want to do. And I think there's millions of wonderful people out there trying to share what's helpful and healing and supportive of our brother and sister human beings. They don't always get the most press, but they're there. And I'm just one grain of sand on that beach.
Fantastic. And I really appreciate, all the work that you're doing. I mean, like I did allude to that there are people that are literally elected and are being paid so much money than you could ever think of, in your whole entire life, but yet they're not doing as much as the grain of sand that you are doing, with the part of the work that you're holding. So, I mean, for that, I think it will be apropos to really put you in the same position and say thank you for your service, because
Mm.
some people are not doing what they're meant to be doing, and there you are, changing the world in your own little way. What sort of legacy do you think this is going to create? And both the psychotherapy and maybe you being an author, and you've already alluded to the fact that there's going to be a sequel to this, or is it just an American thing that when something is good, you want to just keep doing up until you have 13 or 14, ways of having done something?
No, I think the world, let me say it this way, many, many, many people in the world are ready for a change. I think people really do want safety and peace and love in their lives. I've never met anyone who didn't want love, safety, and peace and belonging and cooperation in their own lives. And I think we just need to take what we want in our own lives and make that be a global agenda. Because honestly, I don't know if we're going to make it as a species if we keep investing in weapons of mass destruction and better ways to hate and kill each other. And I think, what brings people to therapy usually is pain. Something isn't working so much in their lives. It's generating so much distress and pain that they're willing to get help and contemplate doing their life a different way. And that's my hope for the human race, that we could really take in that what we're doing in terms of war and discrimination and, terribly imbalanced economies and racial divides and gender divides and all of the things that we're doing to one another, that we could really see that it's not working and commit to the work of changing, because I believe that we really all want a better life.
Absolutely. And I think it was Einstein that mentioned that, if we keep facing issues, or, trying to use, the same mindset that got us in the problems first, it's insanity to expect a different
Insanity,
result.
right?
Um,
And it's insanity. And it's insanity that we're killing so many human beings, innocent families, children, babies. For what?
mm, Absolutely. And there you have it, folks. I can't thank you enough, Phyllis, for first of all being brave, because we both know that obviously for this to be happening, there's got to be bigger and braver people out there that are benefiting from this. Because if somebody wasn't pocketing any money from people being in distress, then
Right,
none of this would
right.
have been happening. And so it's just
That's right.
being brave to obviously show up in a world where people would rather stay away and stay clear and pretend to be doing something about it while they're just sweeping it under the carpet. And that's the reason why in so many a government office, there's so many lumps in the floor, because of all the things they're sweeping under the rug. And thank you so much for shedding a light to all of this, because so many people don't quite see what's actually happening out there, because everybody's just being blinkered and being made to believe that their world and their own little survival orbit is all there is and all that matters. Whereas I think, going back to my culture again, we've got a statement that says, yeah, if you want to go far, yeah, sure, you can go alone. But if you want to go further, you can go together. And I think
Oh, I love that. I love that. Oh, I love that. Thank you.
absolutely. And I think American therapy is going further together. And you've given us a gift, that, so many people didn't know they needed. And it's all these little known secrets that you've compiled together that are going to make this world a happier place. So truly, truly thank you for that. And for those that are watching right now, I mean, has been a truly enlightening conversation with a remarkable Phyllis. please help her spread this message, because it might not be you, it might be your neighbor. Buy a book
Mhm.
for your family, buy a book for your church, buy the book, for Thanksgiving, and give it to people so that at least they can actually do and have a happier existence. And if we're not going to be doing this for us, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? All right. I think if you haven't been moved by Phyllis' insights, then this is actually a reason why you need to check in, why this hasn't touched you. Because, as you said, we are all seeking for peace, love, and harmony, not the fighting and bickering that we find ourselves, facing every single day. So, grab a copy of her latest book, American Therapy, and join the movement towards creating collective healing. And remember, the journey towards prosperity begins with understanding and compassion. I just want you to know that we want you to keep thriving, to keep learning, and keep prospering. And it's people like Phyllis that come to the show that make a difference in what they are doing. So don't forget to subscribe and maybe share this episode with fellow seekers of wisdom out there that you might be, in cahoots with. Until we meet again, this has been Prosper and Phyllis. We're signing off. Bye for now.